Welcome to Leadership Moments.
In every great leader's life, there are pivotal moments that shape their character, test their resilience, and awaken their vision.
Together, we'll uncover the invaluable lessons hidden within these transformative moments.
Today, our guest is Dr. Tim Buividas. Tim is the CEO of the Corporate Learning Institute, which he founded in 1992. His passion, his focus is on change management, team, as well as training and development and individual coaching. Tim is also the author of the Team Assess Survey Suite, which really looks at team performance, which is something that we're also going to talk about today. So we're going to cover a few things today. One is, what is Tim seen in terms of how corporate organizations have changed and how leadership has changed, and what he's seeing with high performance teams, as well as talk a little bit about some of the work that he's done with the Team Assess Survey Suite as well. So great to have Tim with us, and we look forward to an exciting session today. So delighted to have Tim with us today. Tim and I go way back. Certainly grateful for his mentorship and his support over the years. In fact, I think Tim was the first corporate learning, his organization was the first organization I worked with and partnered with here in the US when I was in Chicago. So here we are, maybe a little grayer, maybe a little older, but most importantly, definitely, I think a little wiser, Tim.
A little wiser along the way. Definitely. Some road bumps along the way.
That's right. It's so great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining. And I'm really excited for our audience today.
I appreciate it.
Awesome. So what we're going to talk about today is Tim's experience and expertise in leadership, and really his philosophy and what he is seeing around the trends and what is happening within the realms of corporate organizations and leadership today. And again, wealth of knowledge. So we'll dive right in here. So Tim, first of all, can you share with our audience your journey in the leadership training industry and what has really inspired you to pursue this path?
Yeah, I have to go way back. I think leadership was something I always ended up in. So even as a kid, we'd be playing games, and then I would end up in this role of leadership somehow. And as I started to grow up, I ended up in roles of leadership and I ended up having a lot of mentoring. So for some reason, that just happened and occurred. So people saw something in myself as a younger person. I also grew up with a lot of small business owners, entrepreneurs. And so I always knew I was going to have my own company. I just didn't know what it was going to be. And so I finally got into the leadership world. So this is, I think, my fourth or fifth company that I've started. One's still out running with a corrupt old partner of mine. There's a story for another day. Lessons learned along the way. And so I started this company in 1995, I think, 92, 93, 94, 95. And it was really stimulated, believe it or not, from a high school learning experience, from being on a wrestling team back in sports. And we had a really high-performing team. In a nutshell, the team kind of got blown up with poor leadership. The team had never resolved those issues, which I learned in front of a group as I was doing a reflective act. I was teaching them this thing, and I learned it myself and went, oh my gosh, I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it was because of an experience of a poor leadership, which turned out to be great leadership because he cleaned up his mess 5 or 6 years after I'd met him in high school again, where he had focused solely on one person versus the team. So I'd never resolved this whole team leader piece at a young age. It kept coming back. And then I went and I took a class in group dynamics, of all things. A friend of mine had told me I should go take this class. It was a master's degree class. And I was like, nah, I don't want to do that. And they said, no, this class is kind of built for you. And it was a group dynamics where you go and you sit in this space for a couple of weekends and you figure out who you are. And It's supposed to be the pinnacle class, the last class, but I took it as the first class in this master's degree in organizational behavior. And that was it. I was hooked. I'm like, this is where I am supposed to be in the world. And so I learned about leadership. I knew I was going to be in my own business at some point. And I had finally discovered the content or material of what it was going to be. And so it was really finding my strengths. You know, if you've done Strengths Finder or anything like that, my strengths really aligned with what I did. I was always a processor with friends. We'd be up all night talking about everything in the world that mattered and transfer that all into a business around what I think is really important. You know, leadership is critically important, and teaching it to people that are young. We don't do it at a young enough age, in my opinion. So that's a little bit about my background.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say it goes way back, because I think for many of us it does.
Yeah.
I get asked a lot with people that are still in corporate, but are looking at, I'm getting to the end of my career. I am passionate about leadership. I'm passionate about giving back. I'm passionate about developing people. Do I go get into executive coaching?
Yeah.
What I get so much of that. So I think your experience and how you got in to running your own corporate learning institute, I think that to me resonates with a lot of people that are probably listening, right? Because they don't want to stop. They feel like they've got all this wealth of information, but they don't know what to do with it now.
Everybody wants to be a consultant at some point. The feedback I've gotten so many times, wow, you got the greatest job in the world. I do. It's a wonderful job. There's a lot of freedom. You get to do really cool things. You get to meet cool people. You have wonderful conversations. You get to influence people. People let you into their world. They trust you. It's a lot of hard work. You know, I put in many hours to build up client bases and feast and famine. And we've chosen to stay small. We've gone back and forth, grown business, grown, shrunk, based on economy and adjusting, just like any business. And we've gone through just about everything any business has gone through. But if you want to get into consulting, it's, again, a phenomenal career. I've mentored a lot of people, and I'm always willing to answer any questions from anybody that wants to get into the field. So consider me a resource if anybody out there wants to have a conversation.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I will definitely share your information, and thanks so much for that. Years and years and years of experience working with Fortune 1000 companies. Some of your work has been exceptionally complex in terms of some of the leadership challenges that you've had to go in and try and help and solve. I personally know from way back some of those that we dealt with. But how has your perspective of leadership evolved over the years?
When I came through this stuff and was studying leadership, I studied leadership in the 80s. And so we were going, it was heavy into the soft skills. And so I'm kind of thinking of like a pendulum swinging, right? And so as I was coming through it, all my studies, we swung way to one side, consensus driven. Okay, we're going to take care of everybody. We're going to make every decision together. We're going to build these high performance teams. We're going to do all this wonderful, great work. And we try to do all that work, but it's extremely difficult. And what I've found over the years is the pendulum is swinging back again. I would say not to autocratic leadership, but someplace more towards the middle. And I think that's the place we need to be. We need to be in the middle where leaders can step in and make a decision and say, no, we're going to go in this direction. And it's okay, leader directed. But we also have to be able to engage people in decision making also. So it's having that good balance of knowing when and how to make decisions, how to engage people, how to create change. And I think a lot of times what had happened is that leaders became fearful of making decisions because we were worried that employees would resist too much. And overcoming resistance, in my mind, is just time, right? And we have to be strong enough to stick with something to get through resistance, where if we don't do that, then we can't. So pulling that all back together, too soft, it was too hard of a leadership, too autocratic, swung to too soft. Now coming back right into, I think, the sweet spot of it all for most leaders. The other thing that's changed is that when I was studying this back in the 80s, people had started to come through this in the 70s, late 60s. People were learning about this. Most people didn't know it. So when I would go into an organization, people didn't know what I was talking about. Now, when you go into it, most leaders have definitely learned about mission, vision, values. They're learning about strategy. They're learning about engagement. And so I'm going to say leaders today are much more educated in the concepts of organizational behavior, organizational development than they were back then. So that is, for me, extremely rewarding from a practitioner perspective, that people understand leadership concepts, where before we were more homegrown. So we're getting the balance between education and homegrown experience.
Yeah. You know, I love that, because I think it's also, you then are faced with what I would say, they have more of a desire to want to create better leaders because they have more knowledge and acumen about the value of leadership.
Yeah.
Because I remember a time where in some cases people thought this training and workshopping and stuff like that, that's all just fluff. Well, it is if there's no consequence at the end. Constant action-orientated momentum created from the workshop or the training and things like that. I know we always tried to make sure that we did that when everything was said and done. But the reality is, to your point, it's so much more rewarding to go in. You know, people have an understanding and they genuinely understand that there are ways to create high-performance teams. There are ways to be better leaders.
And I think the key is finding those organizations that it's not fluff, that it's real.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of organizations that don't dedicate enough time and effort to it.
Yeah.
To create a good leadership bench, a strong leadership bench, takes years. It doesn't take 2 classes.
Yeah.
Right. And I think what organizations do is we do shortcut the amount of training that we do, development we do for any level of employee.
Yeah.
And we see it in the surveys. They always come back and say, we'd like to have more leadership development, team development, employee development, skill development. It's on all the surveys. And then we put out something to say, here you go. We gave you something. I think it's our responsibility as leaders and as organizations start becoming cities. I mean, there are 50,000 employees. They're responsible to educate these employees in a way that's changing the world.
Yeah.
This is what leadership is about. We're here to create change and to make the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious on that note, what do you think is one of the leadership philosophies that is overlooked a lot, but is critical to success?
I have a couple that come to mind. One is situational leadership. So situational leadership's a model that's been around since the 70s, developed by Hershey and Blanchard. And it's a real simple model, but if it's integrated well, if it's used really well, it's profound. I had used it at a really deep level with my staff, and they would actually tell me how they wanted me to lead them, what style. They would say, Tim, delegate now. They'd say, no, be directive here. They'd say, no, we need to talk about this. And it's amazing when you can get to that depth. Most people know the model and they go, yeah, okay, I need to delegate more often, right? But to take any tool and to bring it to a deep level. And so, there's all sorts of information on situational leadership, or SL2 is the Blanchard version out there in the world. There's textbooks on it. And that's very popular. It's all over the place. But I'm talking about taking it to an expert level. The other one is appreciative inquiry. So appreciative inquiry has been around probably since the early 80s, mid 80s also. David Cooperrider, and he also had a partner that developed that. And appreciative inquiry, it's like an alternative to a problem-solving approach, where you're looking at the world from possibilities and what could be versus what's wrong with the system. And so when you do that, as soon as you do that, the conversation changes. And so it's like, what are we doing wrong here? To let's take a look at this. What are we doing right? How do we do more of this? And so appreciative inquiry is more based on positive psychology, and it sets a different tone. I use it often. So if I'm doing interviews with staff or as part of something, the questions I write and design are based on a positive. This way, when people walk out of the experience, I'm already creating change just in the interviews, and it's a positive change. People are going, well, that was really good. They expected it to be bad, and it was good. And so they're walking down the hallway, they tell somebody else, hey, that was a good experience. I hadn't thought about that for a while. We are doing really well here. And so appreciative inquiry is very powerful, used in the right context. So those would be the two that come to the top of my mind.
Yeah, I love that. Appreciative inquiry. Yeah, I'm going to look that up actually. So
Also
now,
good for visioning work too. Is really great. Mission values.
I'm going to just pivot quickly. You have created a team assessment tool. Now, I did a lot of teamwork with you, and that is definitely a major strength of yours for sure. And I'm going to tell everyone an experience once we're done with this question that I had with Tim. My first lesson from Tim, probably one of many. What motivated you to develop this team assessment tool, and how is it different from other tools in the market?
Sure. Well, I was working on my doctorate. So I have a doctorate in organizational leadership. And as part of that, you have to do an intervention of sorts. And so mine was around team effectiveness. So as part of your intervention, you have to do a measure. So I was out looking for a tool to use as a measure, and I was doing research, and I couldn't find one as a tool that was research-based, and two, that was affordable. So I looked at a lot of different ones, and a lot of the popular ones, a lot of them didn't want me to use their tool because they were worried about what I think that I might have found in their research, right? Because I would have validated their instruments or not. So I ended up using one from a really good researcher, and I appreciate he let me use his tool. So when I came out of it, I was sitting with my chair, and she said, well, she goes, I know you really struggled with this. She goes, why don't you just create your own? And I'm like, makes sense to me. And at the same time, I had met a guy named Martin Gross, who was my back at a house guy. And he goes, Tim, why don't you develop a survey? And I went, well, there's 2 people in a week that said the same thing to me, so I guess I have to go do this. And so we went and created an online tool. And what we did is it took us about 3 years to develop the instrument. And what makes our instrument different, so we created a model first. So there's 7 different components to it. Most team surveys do is they look at like the personality stuff. They look at like DISC or Myers-Briggs, or maybe like the Belden different styles. Strengths finders. These are personality pieces, which we're certified in all these kind of things. What we did is we looked at it and said, how do you actually really build a team? And so when you're building a team, it's different. You have to look at, do we have a plan? Do we have a strategy? Are we aligned with mission? Do we have organizational support? Do we have an infrastructure built so we get information? Do we have our meetings are the appropriate length? Is the topics right? Do we have appropriate leadership in our meetings? What else do we have? Are the individuals on our team, do they have the right skill sets? And so all these different components, then you look at team effectiveness is how are we all getting along in that? Most surveys just look at team effectiveness. I probably coded over 1,000 questions from different surveys, and 95% of them focused on team effectiveness. And only 5% of the questions actually looked at the output of the team, which is the results. And so our survey starts to look at the results that you're putting out as a team. Again, are we generating the results? Are we productive? Are we doing meaningful work? Are we aligned with strategy?
Which is critical.
Which is critical, and that's what we should be measuring. And then we independently validated from University of Illinois through their iLead program, a guy named Don Kuchner, and off we went and we created this instrument and the tool. So for any leader, when you're thinking about teaming, I know it that you're not thinking about teaming. You're thinking about getting work done. Okay. And you show up at work, you're not going, well, let's see, what should I be doing to get my team ready today? You're thinking about, oh my gosh, we've got this to get done, this, get this done. I got 25 emails I got to respond to. Okay. And then we go, I got a problem. We have to do a team retreat. So what leaders aren't doing well enough, and we could take it to the next level, is really actively managing our teams.
Fascinating.
Yeah, where do we get the time? That's the problem. Yeah. So it's an and, it's not an or. We have to manage our teams. We have to be consciously aware, intentional about how we're managing our team every day. So as leaders, we have to get back to becoming managers, day-to-day managers of our team. And this model and instrument allows you to do a pre and post measure of how you're doing on that.
I love that, because I think, especially as you go up into the executive ranks, that happens more and more. But I find the teams that are most impactful are those that have direct access to their leaders,
Yep.
and the leaders are not doing their work, but their leaders are actively engaged in the work getting done.
Yes.
And there's a difference, right? You
Yeah.
want to empower your people, but you also have to be in the business ensuring that you're going to get to the results.
Yeah.
And the team has the support they need.
And you had asked the question too, is how has leadership changed? Teams have changed. And so, we're not teaming like we used to team. And so that's the other thing I think it's critically important for leaders is looking at what type of team do you have? Is it an independent team where we're all off on our own cubicle doing our own thing? Or are we interdependent? Where are we interdependent?
Mm-hmm.
Some people are going, leaders I work with, we have no camaraderie. Well, they're an independent team. They shouldn't have it, and it's okay. But this leader's trying to force camaraderie, and the people are going, no, we don't want that. We don't need it.
Yeah.
And so you've got to look at the type of team that you have. It's really important. And we call it a group. It might not be a team.
Yeah.
But you still have to manage that group. Be a large group, be a small group. So many different dynamics that go into it, and every little group is different. You can go and look at the model on any particular team.
That's fantastic.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So in your opinion, what do you think are the key elements that contribute to this high performance within teams? How do you assess and cultivate a high performance in leaders and their teams?
Okay. So the particular model has 7 different elements.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Yes. So
Okay.
so how do you do that? Yeah.
So there's 7 different elements. First one is the team type. So are we looking at what is that team particular type?
Okay.
Are we size, group, tenure, all these different components? The second one is leadership. It's comprised of the leadership approach, are they giving feedback, and what kind of direction? The third essential is team effectiveness. How well does the team work together? The fourth is team infrastructure. Team infrastructure is all these pieces we put together to actually build the team. The fifth is individual, and this is the whole measure of the individuals. Do they have the motivation? Do they feel like they belong? We're into this inclusion and belonging, which we measure that. So are they into that particular piece? Then 6 is organizational support. We've got all those different pieces to come together. So that's the basic model. So what a leader's doing and a team is doing is they're coming together that you would score an assessment. And you're going to come back and you're going to work these pieces. You're going to pick a couple of different items as a team and a group, and you're going to work these for a month or two. And you're going to come back and the leader's going to reassess and keep coming back. And then you're going to look at, are we a low performing team, high performing, or are we meeting our expectations? What we want to do first is hit all our goals, hit our expectations. Most teams aren't hitting expectations. They always aim for high, but let's get to hitting all our goals. Think about if every team showed up at work every day and hit their goals every day.
Yeah.
Be amazing. An organization of 500 people every day did our job, it would be an amazing world.
Incredible.
Now, take the model out of it. What do leaders have to do? Leaders have to create space for dialogue. So the missing link in all of this is that we're not creating enough space for people to have a conversation around what's happening. Simple as that. You or I, as consultants, we can walk into any team and I don't even need an agenda on a piece of paper. I don't need to have a topic. I could sit down and say, what do we need to talk about today? And they would talk about what's important, because every group needs space to talk. And so we have to create dialogue. We are going so fast as workers, as the pace with technology. I kind of look at it, you like music. Here's a question for you. Why is there space between notes in music? Tracy Ann, there's the question. Why is there space between notes?
To give the music space to be heard.
If there wasn't space, what would you have?
It would be chaos, I think. It wouldn't really sound.
It would just be noise.
Yeah.
And this the same thing with work. Is what we've done is we've taken the space out of the beautiful music of work, and we've just made it nonstop work. The space is what we need. And so what happens is we do retreats or we do training that gives us a little bit of space to have a conversation around how are we teaming, how are we leading, How are we reflecting? How are we learning? But that space isn't enough. And so what leaders have to do is a better job of creating that space with individuals and teams. So just doing your check-ins. If you do a meeting once a week, convert one of those meetings once a month, convert that meeting to a dialogue meeting.
Love it.
Talk about your team, pull the model out and say, where are we working well? Where are we not working well? How do we improve? Simple.
Yeah. How great.
And it doesn't have to be that complicated.
Yeah.
Right?
So a question for you then, for all of our audience and those that are listening, is there an actual piece of advice that you think you could give to our listeners today who really are passionate about their team, are passionate about being better leaders, maybe even those that are sort of emerging leaders? What action could they take?
Their own leadership skills. Get uncomfortable. What I mean by that is there's this vulnerability piece we talk about all the time. And a lot of us, we don't like that word. I have to get vulnerable. What does that mean? Usually what that means is, when I think of this from a leadership perspective, is that we're holding back from saying what we need to say. And so I would start there from anywhere along that pipeline, whether you're up and coming or if you're at the top of your game, is really work on expressing the things you're holding back, but doing it in a way that is definitely constructive, right? As it can be. When leaders can share some vulnerability, take on some risk to share something that is vulnerable, then it allows other people in the group to do the same. And then we could start having some real conversation. And what we're after is some real conversation, some real dialogue. And if we all did that, then we get to some truth.
Yeah.
We're aiming for truth. And we're not talking about this happened to me 20 years ago. No, we're talking about work, right? We're talking about work stuff. And we're talking about, I need to give you some feedback. I want some feedback.
Yeah.
Those kind of conversations where we want to become comfortable with that.
And create a real trusted environment.
Create the trusted environment, the safe space kind of concepts.
So there's that sound. We're hearing that sound, which means I've got to ask you some questions. So the question is, what is your favorite sound?
Silence.
That's
Peace.
awesome.
I was in a small town in the middle of nowhere yesterday with my brother, and we went into some gem shop, and he picked up a singing bowl, and he was doing one of those singing bowls. He never saw one before, and he liked it. So that's a nice sound too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The sound of a singing bowl.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've never had one of those, actually. I'll have to check them out. If you were an animal, what would you be and why?
Oh, I would be a bird, a hawk. I'd like to soar. Yeah.
Peaceful as well. Very peaceful.
Yes.
Yeah. That's awesome. And my last question is, what are your favorite family traditions? I know your family is really important to you.
Our family traditions. Thanksgiving is probably our one family tradition that we're still holding together. That's been going on since before I was born. So over 60 years, we've held it together now.
Wow.
So yeah. And so we come together, and right now it's maybe a group of 30-ish, and we're on third, fourth generation coming together to share a meal together. My background is Lithuanian, so we have some Lithuanian food. Kubila.
Awesome.
Some good kubila is the one dish that has survived.
That's amazing. That is so cool. Before we let you go, I have to just tell our audience one of the lessons that you taught me. Tim had done a Teams day out on the ropes courses. We got a bus at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning. I'll never forget it. It was very vivid in my mind. And we all got on the bus and we went out to Tim's facilities, and we got an opportunity to do team activities. And obviously it's all with a purpose. When we got out on the ropes courses, and then we got to a 30-foot pole, and Tim saw me sort of step back versus lean in, and he said, "Are you doing it?" And I said, "Well, no, I was just going to let everyone do it. And of course, I'm scared of heights, so I'm trying to play cool as to why I'm not doing it." And all Tim said was, "You're the leader. You have to lead by example." That's all he said. And I got up that 30-foot pole, very scared, I'll just say that, but I did it, got to the top, and I led by example. And I want to thank you for that, Tim. It was subtle. You were very quiet. You did it on the side. None of my team heard, but you taught me that lesson. And that is how I have lived my life. That's because of you. And I'm very, very grateful for that. So thank you.
I think you've always led your life that way.
Well, that's because I've had people like you in it. But thank you. I certainly hope for all of our audience that they thoroughly enjoyed. Tim is a wealth of information, knowledge, incredible wisdom. This is not only his passion, but this is who Tim is. He is an incredible expert in leadership and teams. And we'll make sure that you'll get his information. If you want to reach out, please do. And I know you'll see more of him as we continue to partner on different things. But Tim, I want to thank you for being with us today. And I always say, just remember, together, we can all make a difference. Fantastic. Thanks for coming on today, Tim.
And that concludes another episode of Leadership Moments. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights in what we shared today. Remember, leadership is not defined solely by titles or positions, but by the choices we make and the moments that shape us.
Embrace the challenges that come your way. They may be the very moments that propel you toward greatness. We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories as well. Connect with us on our website at leadershipmomentspodcast.com or through social media on Instagram at @tap_be the game changer.
And Stacey Castor _. Remember, your leadership moment could be just around the corner, waiting for you to seize it. This is Stacey Castor, and what doesn't challenge you won't change you.
This is Tracy Ann Palmer, and be the change you wish to see in the world.